We find ourselves in seasons where everything feels quieter than before. People drift away, conversations fade, and suddenly, we are left walking paths we never chose alone. In those moments, we wonder what God is doing in our lives. What no one tells us is that this loneliness may not be rejection, but preparation. God may be guiding us into a deeper place with Him, where His voice becomes clearer than ever before. Stay with us until the end, because we believe God will reveal something powerful to your heart today. If this message blesses you, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment so God may continue to guide your steps. Those who stay until the end will receive a special blessing from the Lord. Number 1, when we feel completely alone. When we find ourselves surrounded by people yet still feeling unseen, something deep begins to happen within us. It is not just emotional loneliness, it is something harder to explain. We can sit in the same room with familiar faces, even those we love, and still feel like no one truly understands what we are carrying inside. In these moments, we start asking questions we cannot easily answer. Why do we feel so distant, even when nothing has changed on the surface? Why does God feel silent when we need Him most? What no one tells us is that this kind of loneliness may not be a sign of abandonment, but a sign of separation for divine purpose. This is where God begins to remove the noise so we can hear what we have been missing. The hook here is simple but powerful. If everyone feels far away, it may be because God is intentionally drawing us closer to Him in a way we have never experienced before. We see this pattern throughout Scripture. Elijah once believed he was completely alone, yet God had preserved a remnant. Even Jesus experienced deep loneliness in the garden when those closest to Him could not stay awake with Him in prayer. These moments were not accidents. They were sacred transitions where God was doing something deeper than comfort. He was building dependence, clarity, and spiritual sensitivity. When we enter this season, our first instinct is to escape the silence. We try to fill it with distractions, conversations, or anything that makes the feeling go away. But the invitation from God is different. He is asking us to stay, to listen, and to discover that His presence becomes more real when everything else feels distant. In this season, we are not being forgotten. We are being formed. The loneliness that feels heavy is often the very place where God begins to speak the clearest. And if we hold on, we will begin to realize that what felt like isolation was actually invitation. Stay with us as we continue, because what God does next in this process will change how we see everything. Number 2, when our desires begin to change. There comes a point in our journey where what once excited us no longer holds the same weight. We may still be in the same environment, listening to the same conversations, even doing the same activities, yet something inside us has shifted. The things that once pulled our attention now feel empty, and what used to feel normal begins to feel distant. This change can feel confusing, almost like we are losing a part of ourselves. The hook here is not what is happening around us, but what is happening within us. Why are we no longer satisfied with what used to fill our time and thoughts? Why do certain places, habits, or even friendships start to feel out of place? What no one tells us is that this inner shift is often not confusion, but direction. It may be God quietly reordering our desires so that we no longer cling to what cannot carry us into the next season. Instead of external separation first, God often begins internally. He changes what we want before He changes where we are. This creates tension because we still exist in familiar surroundings while our heart begins to move elsewhere. It can feel like disconnection, but in reality, it is transformation in progress. We may notice we are drawn more to silence, prayer, or reflection. The noise that once felt normal now feels overwhelming. This is not random. It is often the beginning of spiritual realignment. God is not taking something away without purpose. He is replacing shallow desires with deeper hunger for what is eternal. In Scripture, we see this pattern in many lives. People called by God often experienced internal shifts before external change. Their desires no longer matched their surroundings, and that mismatch became the catalyst for separation. What we are experiencing is not the loss of identity, but the formation of a new one. And although it may feel uncomfortable, it is often the clearest sign that God is already preparing us for something greater than what we can currently see. If this resonates, we should pay close attention, because this inner shift usually leads to the next stage of separation that we rarely expect. Number 3, when we feel deeply misunderstood. There is a moment in our walk where we realize something uncomfortable. We can no longer explain ourselves in a way that others fully understand. Even when we try to express what is happening inside us, the words fall short, or people simply do not relate to what we are going through. This creates a quiet tension between us and the world around us, and it can feel like we are becoming strangers in familiar places. The hook here is the emotional gap between what we know God is doing in us and what others can see on the outside. Why do we feel like we are changing in ways we cannot explain? Why do people we trust begin to question the path we are taking? What no one tells us is that misunderstanding often increases when separation is already in motion. It is not always rejection. Sometimes it is realignment. In this stage, God begins to protect what He is building by limiting how much others can influence it. Not everyone will understand the process because not everyone is called into the same preparation. This creates a natural distance, not because love is gone, but because direction has changed. We may find ourselves withdrawing not out of pride, but out of necessity. Conversations that once felt easy now feel heavy. Advice that once helped now feels misaligned. Even good intentions from others can feel like pressure when God is leading us differently. This is where we must be careful not to interpret misunderstanding as failure. In Scripture, many who were chosen by God were misunderstood before they were established. Joseph was misunderstood by his own family. David was misunderstood by his brothers. Even Jesus was misunderstood by those closest to him. When we are in this space, God is teaching us to stand firm without external validation. Our clarity must come from Him, not from agreement around us. This is not isolation for the sake of loneliness, but separation for the sake of clarity. And as uncomfortable as this feels, it is often the moment where our identity begins to anchor more deeply in God than in people. Number 4, when everything starts to slow down or close. There is a season where life no longer moves the way it used to. Opportunities that once seemed certain suddenly disappear. Plans that felt stable begin to fall apart without warning. Doors we thought would stay open quietly shut, and what remains feels like silence. It is in this pause that confusion often grows, because from our perspective, nothing seems to be moving forward anymore. The hook here is the feeling of interruption. Why does progress suddenly stop when we were expecting acceleration? Why do prayers feel unanswered when we need direction the most? What no one tells us is that this pause may not be delay in the way we think. It may be divine protection and preparation happening behind the scenes. In this stage, God often removes momentum so we are no longer driven by speed, but by trust. When everything slows down, we are forced to look beyond results and learn dependence. This is uncomfortable because we are wired to measure life by movement, success, and visible progress, but God often measures growth in stillness before expansion. We may try to force doors open or recreate what has been lost, but nothing seems to respond the way it used to. This is where frustration can grow if we misunderstand what is happening. However, if we step back, we may realize that God is not simply stopping things, He is redirecting them. Many biblical stories follow this pattern. Joseph experienced years of delay before promotion. Moses spent decades in hidden preparation before calling. These were not wasted years. They were shaping seasons where timing was being formed, not denied. In this space, God teaches us that closed doors are not always punishment. Sometimes they are protection from paths we are not yet ready to walk. What feels like delay may actually be alignment we cannot yet see. And if we stay faithful in this stillness, we begin to notice something subtle. Even when nothing moves externally, something is being built internally that will carry us into the next season. Number 5, when we begin to crave God more than anything else. There is a turning point in our journey where something within us begins to shift in a way we cannot fully control. The things that once satisfied us no longer hold the same weight. Noise feels heavier, distractions feel emptier, and even things we once enjoyed begin to lose their meaning. At the same time, there's a growing pull inside us toward silence, prayer, and being alone with God. The hook here is the internal tension. Why are we no longer drawn to what once filled our time and emotions? Why does everything else feel less important compared to God's presence? What no one tells us is that this kind of shift is often not loss, but attraction towards something deeper that God is awakening within us. In this stage, separation does not always come from losing people first. It begins with gaining something stronger inside. A new hunger for God starts to replace old dependencies. We may find ourselves naturally stepping back from environments that once shaped us, not because we are forced out, but because our spirit no longer feels aligned there. This can feel strange at first. We are still in the same world, but we no longer belong to the same rhythm. Our priorities begin to change without external pressure. Prayer becomes more natural, reflection becomes more necessary, and time with God starts to feel more real than anything else around us. What we are experiencing is not withdrawal, but reordering. God is shifting the center of our desire so that He becomes the foundation of everything else. This is important because without this shift, the next seasons would overwhelm us. Scripture often shows that before God expands someone's life externally, He first deepens their intimacy internally. Those who are called into purpose are often drawn into deeper dependence before greater responsibility. If we recognize this hunger rising within us, we should not ignore it. It is not emptiness, it is invitation. Number 6, when our spirit begins to feel constantly drawn to prayer. There is a shift that happens which we do not always recognize at first. We find ourselves turning inward more often, not out of fear or sadness, but out of a growing awareness that God feels closer in silence than in noise. Moments that used to be filled with distraction now feel incomplete unless we pause and pray. Even in ordinary days, there's a quiet pull toward God that does not go away. The hook here is the persistence of this inner calling. Why do we keep feeling drawn to prayer even when nothing around us is demanding it? Why does silence suddenly feel more alive than activity? What no one tells us is that this constant pull may be God training our spirit to recognize His voice in a deeper way. In this stage, separation becomes less about people leaving and more about God filling the space they once occupied. We begin to notice that prayer is no longer just something we do when we need help. It becomes something we cannot avoid. There is a sense of urgency, as if our spirit is responding to something unseen but very real. This can feel different from previous seasons because it is not driven by emotion alone. It feels steady, almost like a new rhythm forming within us. We may wake up earlier without knowing why, or find ourselves praying in moments we used to ignore. The connection is becoming more natural, more continuous. What God is doing here is building dependence that is not based on circumstance. He is teaching us to stay connected even when everything else is silent. This prepares us for seasons where external support will not be available, but His presence will be enough. In Scripture, we see this pattern in those God prepared for assignment. They were often drawn into solitude, not as escape, but as formation. Prayer became their anchor before their purpose was revealed. If we are experiencing this pull, it is not something to resist. It may be one of the clearest signs that God is drawing us closer than ever before. Number 7, when we begin to see God's purpose in everything, there comes a moment in our journey where something inside us starts to look at life differently. The same events that once felt random now begin to form patterns we cannot ignore. What used to feel like loss now starts to look like direction. Even the painful parts of our story begin to carry meaning we did not see before. It is as if our perspective is slowly being opened. The hook here is the shift in interpretation. Why do past disappointments suddenly feel connected instead of meaningless? Why do closed doors no longer feel like endings, but like redirections? What no one tells us is that this change in vision is often the final stage of separation, where God reveals that nothing we went through was wasted. In this stage, we are no longer focused on what we lost, but on what God has been building through every moment. The confusion starts to clear, not because circumstances change, but because understanding begins to form. We start to see how certain people left, how certain doors closed, and how certain seasons ended right on time. This is not a sudden revelation, but a gradual awakening. We begin to recognize that God was present even in the silence, even in the waiting, even in the separation. What once felt like abandonment now feels like guidance we did not understand at the time. The emotional weight of earlier stages begins to transform into clarity. We are no longer only asking why things happened, but what God was shaping through them. And this shift changes how we move forward. We stop resisting the process and start trusting the pattern. In Scripture, those who walked closely with God often only understood the full picture after they had passed through the season. Looking back, they saw that every step, even the lonely ones, had meaning. If we are beginning to see this now, it is not the end of the journey. It is the beginning of understanding why the journey was necessary in the first place. As we reach the end of this message, we are reminded that what we explored today is not rejection, but God's loving process of separating us so He can shape us, strengthen us, and lead us closer to His purpose for our lives. If this spoke to your heart, there is another message waiting for you on the screen about how even believers can fall into words and habits that God never intended. And it may help you grow even deeper in your walk with Him and avoid things that quietly weaken faith. Please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments so we can stand together in faith and encouragement. Thank you for staying with us. God bless you, and we will see you in the next video.